Los Angeles nights were usually quiet for Keanu Reeves. He was one of the few people who turned his back on fame. He would ride his black motorcycle through the back streets of the city, trying to avoid the attention of the crowd. But this night was different. The streetlights were dim, and the shadows seemed strangely long. This change was reflected, first of all, in his soul. That familiar, incomprehensible feeling, caused by the losses and tragedies brought by the years, was reappearing. The untimely death of his mother, the terrible moments when he lost friends and family, had accustomed Keanu to living alone. But being alone was not a consolation that reduced the impact of these traumas. On the contrary, sometimes the silence itself intensified the fear. On that night, when he could not shake off the weight of his past when he returned home, he found a very strange envelope in his mailbox. There was no sender or address on it, only 2 words were written. "You are ready." The envelope remained in his hands for a long time. His fingers were trembling, his heart was beating fast, as if he felt something coming. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside was an old black and white photograph. It had been left since 1999. It depicted the set of The Matrix. But Keanu was not alone there. Standing next to him was another man who looked a lot like him. But that man's eyes were very empty, and he showed no expression, neither a smile nor any other emotion, just a cold gaze staring straight into the cameras. On the back of the photograph was the sentence, "I was always here." Keanu suddenly sank into a chair and could not stop looking at the photograph. His thoughts were confused, searching for the logic of all these events. He could not remember that such a person existed during the filming, and this confused him. Still, a dark voice whispered inside him, "You have already seen him. You cannot forget." That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he was faced with the same image. A room plunged into darkness, a strange place covered in black liquid flowing from the walls, and that man standing in front of him. An unfamiliar face, but a strangeness that shook the heart. His face was familiar, and his body too, but his eyes were empty, far from life. "Why did you forget me?" the shadow asked. Keanu jumped out of his sleep, screaming from the horror of the sound. It was 3:33. When he arrived at the set the next day, everything progressed even more strangely. One of the technical team approached him and asked in a surprised state, "Keanu, why did you come to the studio last night?" Keanu didn't immediately understand what was happening and calmly said that, "I didn't come." But the man's astonished gaze deepened even more. With a pale face, he said, "But I saw you with my own eyes. You were here at night, dressed in black. You didn't talk to anyone. You were just looking in the mirror." These words flashed through Keanu's mind like lightning. There was an old room in the studio, a room covered with things and forgotten for years. And there was a mirror. Keanu hesitated, but he hurried into that room. As he entered, he immediately felt the heaviness of the air. Dust was everywhere, but one mirror stood out from the others, as if someone's hand had just cleaned this mysterious reflection. Keanu cautiously approached the mirror. At first, he saw his own reflection in front of him, but suddenly, the reflection seemed to be belatedly escaping his gaze. Keanu in the mirror did not look at him. He slowly raised his head and smiled. "Finally, you reminded me." Keanu shuddered and stepped back, but it was too late. A dark, dark shadow began to emerge from inside the mirror. That shadow was not only moving, but even breathing, and its voice was strangely familiar. It was his own voice. "I am the part of you that you have hidden within you," the shadow said. "You thought you had forgotten your pain, your loss, your anger, but you cannot destroy me." Keanu fell to his knees, whispering in a trembling voice, "I just wanted to live." "You sacrificed me to live," the shadow replied harshly. "But now everything will change." A sudden tremor occurred in the room. The lights flickered on and off. The mirrors began to crack and break one by one. Keanu wanted to run, but his feet felt like they were nailed to the ground. The last words that reached his ears were, "The second curtain is now opening." When Keanu opened his eyes, he found himself in a pitch-black void. There was no floor, no walls, only an infinite nothingness. It was as if that shadow emerging from the mirror had dragged him into the unknown of this place. Everything was plunged into darkness, and only one sound could be heard, his own voice. But the voice was distinctly distorted, lifeless and hoarse. A voice broke the silence in Keanu's ears. "Do you remember?" No matter how quickly time passed, that voice was there, stubbornly following him. "You tried to forget me all these years, but I never left," the voice said. Keanu wanted to retreat, but his body was frozen. It seemed impossible to even take a step. He knew that if he took even one step, the shadow would touch him, and one touch would end everything. It could cause him to disappear completely. "No, you are not inside me," he whispered in a trembling voice. The answer came, "You are wrong." The shadow smile, which escaped from his lips from the outside, was felt in every word. "I was always there in your anger, in your sadness, but you are afraid to look. You have always been afraid." At that moment, Keanu felt all the pain of the past again. The untimely loss of his mother, the death of his friends, every drop of his wife's tears. These forgotten pains had created a shadow inside him. Once he had fought to bury this shadow under his skin, but now this cruel element had returned, and it was even stronger. In all the darkness, he could see a single light, a door shining in a distant point. He wanted to reach it, but the shadow no longer stood still. It had begun to wrap itself around him like thin silk. "I will not let you go anywhere," the voice said in its cold tone. "You will not live a life without me. You refuse to face me, but you have no other way out than to see me." Keanu tried to scream, but a foggy void swallowed his voice. The depth of darkness filled his mind, destroying his thoughts, alienating his memory. At first, memories blurred. The bright days of his childhood, the times he spent on the sets, and the shaky shots of his first love. Then the boundaries between reality and fantasy blurred. Everything had created a chaotic labyrinth within him, a labyrinth with no end in sight. At that moment, Keanu realized the shadow was not just a part of his past. It was a living reflection of Keanu's soul. The pain he had tried to save for years, the sadness he had tried to forget, the anger he had suppressed. It was all as if it had become a single entity, and now that entity was here to completely take possession of him. Keanu closed his eyes and suddenly returned to the darkest moments of his past. He remembered the loss of his baby, the indifference on his wife's face, the icy silence that had come with the destruction of his friends. Each of these pains connected his breath with the shadow. Each of them was like a sharp nail stuck in his soul. The shadow's voice came out as a harsh and confused whisper. "I was always inside, but I'm not here to save you anymore. I don't even want to make you like me. I'm just going to destroy you." Keanu fell to his knees. Fear no longer existed only in his thoughts. It had engulfed his entire being. It had become a burning sensation in his heart, in every drop of blood, in his nerve endings. The darkness surrounded him, making it difficult for him to move, constricting his breathing. But despite everything, he tried to resist. Keanu stretched out his hand toward the endless black void in front of him and whispered, "I turned a blind eye to you. I rejected you, but now I understand that you are a part of me. I cannot go on without you." The shadow stood still for a moment. It was as if its voice, its fury, and its very being had been silenced for a moment. Keanu did not miss this opportunity. He moved cautiously through the black void, approaching the shadow. His voice trembled slightly, but there was a firm certainty. "You are a part of me, but I will not command you or control you." The shadow moved forward with deep anxiety, as if it had felt fear for the first time. Keanu, looking into the depths of the void, understood. Sadness, pain, and fear would always be a part of him, but they would no longer be the forces that guided his life. At that moment, a sudden light flashed in the middle of the black void. The light split into small rays and formed the appearance of a door. Keanu began to walk toward the light. With each step he took, the shadow became smaller and weaker, as if its power was the measure accepted by Keanu. When he reached the door, it opened and led him into the real world. He lay before the quiet and dark streets of Los Angeles. Although the atmosphere of the city seemed unchanged, Keanu himself had already changed. He got on his motorcycle and drove towards the outskirts of the city. Although all the pain he had experienced in the past came to mind on the way, They were no longer the burden that determined his fate. He understood now. The shadow would never completely disappear, but it now had a different meaning. Not as an inseparable part of life, not as an insurmountable enemy. At midnight, as the bright lights of Los Angeles faded away, Keanu smiled slightly. He was tired, a little scared, but there was more energy inside than before. He had realized that sometimes the only way to survive was to face all fears and accept them as they were. As he moved forward with these thoughts, a shadow suddenly moved silently behind the motorcycle. Keanu turned his head, a familiar void, a smile indelibly etched in his memory. It was still there. "I'm waiting for the next act," the familiar voice said, echoing in Keanu's ears over and over again. Keanu took a deep breath. He could see the morning lights growing stronger in the distance, but he knew that the shadows would never completely disappear. He was ready to accept this reality. And so in the darkness of the night, accompanied by his own shadows and fears, Keanu Reeves continued on his motorcycle. But he was sure of one thing in his heart. With each new night, the shadows would come a little closer to him. And each time, he would have to continue the struggle to recognize and accept himself anew.